this computer. Okay. All righty. Hello, hello, hello. I'm Lisa Dalton.
Yeah.
and
I'm Ofir Duan.
I'm president of the National Michael Chekhov Association. And Ofir?
I'm a proud student of yours and teacher certified. I had a certification from the NMCA. Yeah, your organization.
Yes, great. And we're here today to talk about Mala Powers, who was one of the co-founders of the NMCA and also the executrix of Michael Chekhov's estate. And she was the beautiful Roxanne de Jose Ferrar's Cyrano de Bergerac in the classic 1950s film of Cyrano de Bergerac.
So I'm very interested about her as about Jacobian, but I know that you had a very close friendship and connection, professional, and you were friends. So I wanted to ask about her. How was she before she came to the Chekhov work, and what exactly she did with him? Because I know she worked closely with him for a lot of time, and and what happened after Chekhov passed away.
Yes. Yes. So Mala and I taught together for 18 years. So we were very close, as you said. And she would be, I consider, my greatest personal mentor of my life, personally, spiritually, and in the Chekhov world. Mala's parents were in the San Francisco area, and her father was in the newspaper industry. And Mala showed at a very early age passion for performing. And so they moved down to Los Angeles. And at the age of 8, Mala started performing on the radio. And she was in some of the little sort of Our Gang comedies and performances like that. And at that time, she worked with Natasha Lytess as a young girl who had also been with Marilyn Monroe, and she also worked with the wife of the impresario who produced Michael Chekhov in Berlin, Max Reinhardt. And I'm forgetting Max Reinhardt's wife's name. Sorry about that. And I can probably find it and post it in some notes. They both tended to work, as Mala said.
Wait. I'm sorry. Wait. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I need and מקליטים איזושהי שיחה. סליחה. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. So Mala told me that both Natasha and Max Reinhardt's wife worked with what she would call more an induction process. So they would coach you, they would instill the performance in you rather than giving you an actual technique. And I'm not sure whether it was Natasha or who it was that Mala found out about Michael Chekhov through, because we know that both Marilyn Monroe and Mala Powers studied with Natasha, and they both studied with Michael Chekhov. So it's possible that Natasha had some connection. But we certainly know that Max Reinhardt's wife certainly knew Michael Chekhov from Max Reinhardt producing his shows, his German shows. And so she had seen all of Michael Chekhov's movies up to that point, which included his Oscar-nominated performance in Spellbound. And she was cast in a film at the age of 16 by Ida Lupino. And Ida Lupino was a very, very prominent director, forward-thinking director, very, very strong, one of the first real strong female directors in Hollywood. And she pushed the edge of the envelope. She cast Mala in a film called Outrage that was about rape. And it was really the first film that really gave a, the rape victims sort of perspective and shared their experience and the trauma around it. And it was very, very controversial. And Mala did a really beautiful job in it. And she later got cast in a film, in the lead of a film. And then they found out that she was still not 18. And so she got uncast from the part because they would have had to hire the studio tutors and limit her work hours and everything else because of the child labor laws. And the casting director was so sort of, mortified and sad for Mala. And she said, how can I make this up to you? And Mala said, you can get me lessons with Michael Chekhov. And so that was how she met Michael Chekhov. She was an only child. Her mother was quite an amazing woman who I had the pleasure of meeting and knowing for several years before she passed. Her mom was a Unity minister, and she was also the minister for the Civil Air Patrol in California. And I'll never forget when she passed away, Mala held a celebration of her life, which was quite an amazing experience because it was in the early 90s and everything was still about dramatic funerals. And Mala created this beautiful celebration of her life. And she had a full honor guard there because of her being chaplain of the Civil Air Patrol and the whole 21 gun salute. Cemetery, and so it was quite impressive, and it also, in addition to revealing something about the magnificent woman that Mala Powers was, that was one of the significant things in my life that I subsequently have had the opportunity to create a number of celebrations of life and have changed a lot of the way people view relating to a person's crossing over. So thanks, Mala, for that. When Mala met Michael Chekhov, she did so when Mr. Chekhov was in a phase of teaching at Akim Tamirov's house. Akim Tamirov was a noted character actor from Russia who adored and respected Michael Chekhov tremendously. And Mr. Chekhov was very shy. So Akim sort of made him come over to Akim's house and would host these sort of soirees or salons or gatherings to feature Mr. Chekhov. And this is also where Anthony Quinn met Mala Powers and met Michael Chekhov. So Mala went to Kim Tamirov's house, and when she Mr. Chekhov greeted her at the door and said, "Oh, you are Betty." That was the casting director's name. You are Betty's friend. And she said, "Yes, I'm here to work with you." And they, I guess, really adored each other right away. And that led to, a friendship, certainly for the rest of their lives. He called her Little Pixie and she called him Big Pixie. And she was just, moving forward in her acting career when Michael Chekhov actually had a heart attack. And that was about the same time, 1949, that she got the job of playing Roxanne in Cyrano de Bergerac. So he wasn't actually able to coach her directly on that particular role. She did, however, use his indications that she had already been learning from him. And then when he got better, she was coached by him on her many film roles and stage roles. And she worked with him in class and in the privacy of his home. So Mr. Chekhov had a small home on the street called San Ysidro in Bel Air in Beverly Hills. And that's one of the places that's where Marilyn Monroe would come and Mala would come and Jack Palance and his wife, Virginia. There's a famous picture of Jack Palance and Virginia Palance and Chekhov. Yes, this picture there. So sad that when we interviewed Jack Palance for From Russia to Hollywood, that he couldn't remember what Mr. Chekhov was demonstrating. Always wanted to ask him and couldn't remember.
What is your guess?
Yeah, my guess is either centers or imaginary body. Yeah. I mean, either there's a character that had its center up here or it had an imaginary body of something
I wonder.
there. That's my guess. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't know, but centers make sense.
Yeah.
Centers make sense. Some kind of image here. I don't know. Maybe a person that always, always there.
Yeah.
Controlled or something.
Yeah. So there, when Mr. Chekhov worked with Mala privately, this is one of the gifts that we get from Mala. Mala was the only actor that Michael Chekhov coached privately on major film roles who also went on to become a teacher. And none of the other people were. Anthony Quinn was certainly a teacher and certainly trained with Michael Chekhov.
Anthony Quinn taught Chekhov's work?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
He did. But he was not privately coached by Chekhov. He created his own pathway in on his roles. And but he continued using Chekhov all his life. Absolutely, as is, in the interview that I did with him.
I had a great interview with him, yeah.
Thank you. So what we got from Mala, well, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We'll talk a little bit more about the technique and what Mala contributed to the evolution of the work and her capacity as executrix. Let me just talk a little bit more about Mala's life. During this period of time when she was a growing star, there's a bunch of things that are popping in my mind. Just by the way, she loved to play villainess roles in Tammy and the Bachelor, in the Tammy series with Debbie Reynolds, who also studied with Michael Chekhov. She played the girlfriend of the man that Debbie Reynolds was in love with, that Tammy was in love with. And she was the evil girlfriend who had to, be gotten out of the way in order for Tammy to,
Yeah.
get her bachelor. And she, Mala always said that, there's just so much more fun to playing the bad girl.
Yeah, sure.
And that was always kind of ironic for everyone who knew Mala, who was just sort of a living angel. So she had.
You once said, and I remember your your tone, and you said, when Mala spoke to you and talked to you, you were the only person existing.
It's very, yes. She had amazing focus, and she juggled many, many things in her marvelous mind, and took on many, many tasks of all sorts, and was able to so fully give. She was just so present. And that's always been a deep inspiration for me. Yeah, you just felt that you were the only person in the world and the only thing that mattered and existed when you were in her presence. And I think that, she really gave that to us as a great gift there. She went on to tour on a USO tour with Debbie Reynolds to Korea. And she contracted, so a USO tour, that's a U.S. Army or military entertainment operations, like Bob Hope used to do and stuff like that. And when during the Korean War, U.S.
in the 50s?
In the 50s, yes.
Okay.
She contracted a very serious blood disease, from which she almost died. And when she came back to the United States, because of her fragile health, she was unemployable in an A film. So she was under a film contract with RKO Pictures and and Howard Hughes and RKO Pictures, and she remained under contract, but the insurance companies were afraid that she wouldn't be able to carry the lead in a major film, and so they wouldn't insure the movie. And because of that stroke of fate, that karma, her career went from an A film star to a B movie queen. Mala was nominated for a Golden Globe nomination in Cyrano de Bergerac, and she was a promising actress. And now, from being a major star in one of the biggest Academy Award nominated films to that date in history, and Academy Award winning films, and she herself a Golden Globe nominee, it was quite a diversion there off into the world of B films, where she played and did a lot of Westerns and sci-fi, and she wound up doing a great deal of television. And when Mr. Chekhov died in 1955, many people are unaware really of what his economic situation was. the book To the Actor was virtually still an unknown. It never, ever generated any level of profitability or saw any level of notable sales that generated enough income. And Mr. Chekhov basically, his lessons were $25 a piece, and they. And he was very, very humble, and he didn't reach out for money and things like that. And one didn't make that much money as a bit part character actor, which is what he was relegated to in Hollywood. And between that and his health, it was very difficult for any major economic stability to arise. There was certainly no retirement plan. And so when Mr. Chekhov died, it was Mala and Marilyn Monroe and some other friends who adored Mrs. Chekhov that helped pay for a house for her in Silver Lake in the Echo Park area, and keep her in a house. In fact, Marilyn Monroe left Mrs. Chekhov in her will. Unfortunately, Mrs. Chekhov passed away before the will ever came out of probate, so she never saw a penny of what Marilyn left her. And that's too bad, because that might have provided some funds to keep Michael Chekhov's work more in the forefront. Mala became the executor of Mr. Chekhov's estate, of the Chekhov estate, and for many, many years.
What is this? What it means?
It means that Mala became responsible for his for the Chekhov legacy.
Okay.
So she became the owner of the copyrights of his books, or the recipient of his share of income from To the Actor. She became the recipient of any residuals. She owned his canes and his hats and his his books, his photos, his image. She had the right to permit people to use him, to translate, etc. And that process was really kind of dormant. Mala went on to marry a man and have a son, Torin, and her husband, ultimately, it was a very difficult relationship. He was abusive and alcoholic, and it was a very, very difficult time for Mala, struggling with motherhood, trying to maintain a career, and of course, living with an abusive alcoholic. And that was something that Mala and I shared in common, because I lived with an abusive alcoholic for 4 years before I met my husband. So we shared that struggle. And eventually she got divorced. Her husband took her son and went to Canada. And Mala met Hughes Miller. And Hughes was a publisher, and they got married, and he absolutely adored Mala. And Hughes was this larger than life character, and he had a company called International Book Publishing. And he he never, I don't think he ever separated the starstruck aspect of the beautiful Roxanne on the balcony from his heart. He really celebrated and adored Mala, and he wanted her on his arm everywhere he traveled. And he had an apartment in New York where he did a lot of his publishing work, and they frequently went to London and to Spain and to many places in Europe because he was an international book publisher. And Mala became the vice president of international book publishers. And she began also creating a story, what was called Dial a Story. And this is back in the 80s, where you could pay 50 cents and dial a 900 number and listen to Mala tell you a story for a minute or two every day. You could hear a story. And Mala published several books, storybooks, and this is one of them. It's called Follow the Year by Mala Powers, and it's really a celebration of family holidays. And it is beautifully illustrated by Frances Elizabeth Livens. And so just to backtrack a little bit to when Mala and Misha, Big Pixie and Little Pixie, were hanging out together. Mala, there she was just a young girl. She started with him at 16. Said to him, Big Pixie, you are not telling me the whole truth, when he was coaching her. And she forced him to reveal what he had started concealing, basically, which was the spiritual underpinnings of his work. And so he revealed to her Rudolf Steiner's influence on him, his devout belief in anthroposophy. And anthroposophy is Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science. It's anthropo, like anthropology, humanity, humanity. Sophie, like philosophy, the wisdom of. So it's the study of the wisdom of humanity. Mm-hmm. And Mala herself became a devout follower of Rudolf Steiner's. And so this book that she published is filled with some of the stories about various celebrations. And here's her greeting to my husband and myself. It's beautiful. It says, "For Lisa and Ken, with love and appreciation for two wonderful friends, may success, joy, the right amount of peace and love be yours as you follow each year. Always, Mala." And it goes basically from Christmas through all sorts of festivals with beautiful images and ways to celebrate. It goes through. Pardon?
She wrote it?
She wrote it and had her friend illustrate it. Yes.
I mean, it's not the collection of something. She wrote it. She actually.
She wrote it. There is in the back an extensive bibliography of the research that she did. So it's that she read the stories, studied the histories of many different cultures, and she acknowledges the original sources of the stories. But it's she has, and she did this. She had, like on this page, it has the um, create your own seasonal stage, and so it's like a little staging area in your home for each of the festivals of what you can do. Just maybe it's just the size of a tray, maybe all you have is space this big, or maybe you have a table by your entryway. And she offers ways to decorate for each of the festivals. And she did this in her home. She always had this all year round. She had a festival table in her home. And she lived, she practiced what she preached.
That's what I wanted to ask, if she was that kind of woman. I mean,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And she wrote all those stories that she would record and create. I mean, she was very, very creative, and a beautiful writer, both penmanship, and she did sort of calligraphy kind of stuff. And this is a copy of a Rudolf Steiner. She gifted me this, just a quote from Rudolf Steiner in a prayer, a daily prayer. And we can talk a little bit more about that later if we want. As she went through her career, she did several TV series where she was a leading, a series regular. She worked with Anthony Quinn on 3 different projects, 2 films, and a TV show called The Man in the City. And she was his right-hand gal in that. And they always had a great time together because they were both using Michael Chekhov's work. And that was a very lovely thing. But ultimately, her travels with her second husband, Hughes, took her out of town so much that she just wasn't really available to work. So while she had been doing a lot of television shows like Bewitched and Hazel and Perry Mason and all those films in the 70s, 60s, 70s, TV shows, 60s and 70s. And she did theater. She did Absence of a Cello on Broadway. And she did regional theater. She did Night of the Iguana in Denver. And she traveled and did regional theater. But then she was just traveling so much with Hughes that her acting career kind of fell away. And that's just the way it will be in Hollywood. If you're not there, you're just not there, because your auditions come very quickly. And Mala and I met because when she was in New York with Hughes, she would, during the 80s, come into Ted Pugh's class that I was in, both at the Rudolf Steiner High School, and then when Ted was also teaching, we were in class at the Beatrice Strait's studio. She and Beatrice Straight remained very dear friends through all of Beatrice's life. And Mala, in addition to being Michael Chekhov's executrix, was also co-executor of Ida Lupino's estate.
Wow.
The director also. And so that was, Ida Lupino actually appeared in a film in the film with where Michael Chekhov played Uncle Leopold, that you have that picture of in our time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lupino was in that, and
Oh, okay.
um, with Michael Chekhov. Um, so Mala, um, as executor of the estate, all this time there was very, very little interest in Michael Chekhov. We know that the early 1950s generated the McCarthy era communism scare. And many of Michael Chekhov's students were blacklisted. And they
Oh,
were, and they left. They left the country. John Barry, who I have an interview with, went to Paris, became a Palme d'Or winning film director, and taught Chekhov in Paris. Um, uh, but many people, Phil Brown, who's also, there's a clip of in From Russia to Hollywood. He was Uncle Owen in Star Wars. Phil was blacklisted. And so a number of followers, Beatrice. So just in part, there were a lot of liberal leanings, and Mr. Chekhov himself, having come from Russia, there was a lot of suspicion, and a lot of the people who were in the group theater really did believe in communist policies and in the idealism of it, in the pure idealism of it. And people like Phil Brown really absolutely believed it. And so part of what happened then was that the stars who could have gone on to bring Michael Chekhov's work more to the fore were eliminated from the public's eye and from public accessibility and credibility. And also, one of the young men who helped bring Mr. Chekhov forward in the Hollywood community in the 50s, who was considered one of the most promising teachers to carry the work forward, was killed in a train.
Ellen Harkness?
Killed in a train crash.
Ellen Harkness? Are you
Alan
talking about
Harkness.
Harkness? Yeah,
Harkness.
Harkness. Okay, yeah.
Yes. And it was just quite a fluke. And
I heard an amazing story about it. That he was driving, and then he um, took his car on. He was with his wife and his daughter, and he took his car on to on the railroad. He did something like this, and I don't know, screamed or something. I don't know, or just this, and then the train just I don't know. I don't know. It was a stroke, or I don't. This is a very strange story I heard.
yeah, I know that it was all very strange, and it's so fascinating, how karma works, and how so repeatedly, certainly it's evident in From Russia to Hollywood, how the socio-political cultures just kept repressing Mr. Chekhov's work, repressing it, because of this, his commitment to the spiritual aspects of it. It just was repressed and repressed and repressed. And then, for these losses, these socio-political, in the United States, the McCarthy hearings, and and losing Alan Harkness, and just crazy things. And then as the 80s progressed, in the late 80s, there started this, well, in the 80s, right, this burgeoning, where in 1980, I came to the work and early connected with Ted and started working in New York. And Beatrice Straight opened her studio in New York. And Ted went to Berlin and connected with Jobst Langhans and Jörg Andres, and they started working. And so there was this impulse of, and I think Jörg connected with people in Moscow while he was still in East Berlin, and connecting with Poland, and just this little network, this little sort of secret underlying web started to grow in the 80s. And people started reaching out to Mala. And so by 1987, the fall of 1987, Mala really felt the impulse to actually teach her very first Chekhov class. And she gathered a group of Rudolf Steiner followers who were interested. And she rented a space in the basement of a church near her home in Toluca Lake. And then she did a 6-week or possibly 8-week class in the fall of 1987. And during that time, that fall of 1987 was Ted Pugh's very first 3-month intensive, daily intensive, which I was in along with Fern. That was really where Fern started beginning some of her leading the class, leading the workshop. Melania Levitsky, Glenn Williamson, Dorothy Emerson were all members of that class, and they all became later participants in some of the international workshops in Berlin and stuff. So Mala was an inexperienced teacher. She had not been a teacher. She'd been a writer. She'd certainly done speeches and spoken in front of people and presented. She was very active in the Anthroposophical Society in Los Angeles. And she was very dedicated to Mr. Chekhov's work, in particular, the study of reincarnation. And ultimately, I will say this, that even more so than moving Mr. Chekhov's work into the world, it was important to her to help move the concept of reincarnation. And I'll talk about that a little later, too. At the end of my 3 months with Ted there, that was about the culmination of 7 years of my study of Michael Chekhov's work in New York. And I had studied with everybody who knew everything or anything about Chekhov, Beatrice and Deirdre, all the people at the Chekhov studio, and I was ready to leave New York, in part also because of my own career, which was very, very successful at the time, very, very successful as a comedian, as an impersonator, as a stunt woman, and as an actress. But I was still, I was making a lot of money as an actor, as a performer in one area or the other, but I was still paying to produce myself in plays on stage. And I felt that I needed to leave. What was awakened in me spiritually through my work with Ted, really, Ted and Fern and the group there, I just knew that jumping off buildings and being a Madonna impersonator and the kind of things that I was doing that were making a lot of money was just a very materialistic path, and it wasn't my true destiny. And my husband was ready to leave New York. And so we moved to Los Angeles. And there, because I had met Mala, Ted connected me with Mala and with George Stanoff. So George Stanoff was Chekhov's co-director of the Chekhov Theater Studio in Dartington Hall and in Ridgefield, and is the person who he dedicated to the actor to. So I began working with both of them. When I started with Mala, I reached out to her right after she had finished teaching this fall workshop, and she invited me to teach with her starting in February of 1988. We began a class together. We spent January getting to know each other better and creating the class. She wanted me to teach with her because she didn't remember all the physical exercises. And also, I was already a teacher. I was always teaching from a very, like I taught my first class when I was in 5th grade. And I was constantly teaching. I taught high school when I was in college, and I went straight from college into teaching as a career as a teaching artist with Bond Street Theater, and we were adjunct at NYU, and I was teaching with Brooklyn College in an outreach program in high schools when I was studying with Ted, and doing hospital audiences and all sorts of programs. So I was always teaching. And I had, in fact, learned the whole technique through the lens of a teacher as well, because I was out there practicing it and applying it in so many different areas and making a good living off of it. I was learning and thinking and developing ways to teach how to use Chekhov's work. And so in our construct with Mala, she asked me to teach the tools, basically. And Mala had a black and white version of this chart, which we have expanded and colorized here, which Mr. Chekhov had hand-drawn for her. And it really was his final summary of his technique for Mala.
He drew it to her in their private sessions, right?
Yes. And so she gave me all this stuff and all this information, and we developed a pedagogy around it together. And during this time, I was also teaching privately. And so I was always experimenting on these levels, and I was studying with George Stanoff. So I was teaching privately, teaching with Mala. Mala taught the second half of the class, which focused on preparing the part, where she revealed all of the ways that Mr. Chekhov worked with her on preparing a part. And in studying with George Stanoff, George had been teaching for a long time. George held that what he taught was what he co-created. He felt he was an owner. He could only teach George Stanoff. And so he did not discuss Michael Chekhov during class. He did not attribute what he was teaching to Michael Chekhov. And he himself objected when he saw an ad that I had for my private classes, the Michael Chekhov workshop. He called Mala and told Mala that she needed to make me stop teaching a Michael Chekhov workshop because only Michael Chekhov could teach Michael Chekhov. And anyone who was teaching could only be teaching themselves. And there's that was his perspective.
Yeah, that was his logic. Yeah,
that was his logic. And I respect that for him in the same way that I respect the creative individuality of any given teacher. My sort of moral or ethical code I just can't claim that what I'm teaching is Lisa Dalton's work, because, to me, that just is not true. It's certainly my lens, it's certainly my pedagogy, my structure that I've developed, with Will Kilroy and Mala Powers. We have created this pathway of how to teach this work, and it really was in many ways my honor to help mentor Mala as a teacher, because she had not been a teacher. So that was one of the gifts that I brought back to Mala. I am a synthesizer, and Mala had that also. She had that wonderful ability to see many different things and synthesize them. And so in that we shared that, she was extremely interested in joining this. How do we teach this amorphous technique where people are still, afraid to say the word aura, and still afraid to acknowledge the power of invisible worlds, the supersensible, and the interrelationship of the unconscious and subconscious and superconscious with consciousness. And so we were sort of together like rabid detectives looking for scientific support. And one of my first scientific support systems was Ramon Delgado's work, Acting with Both Sides of the Brain, where Ramon Delgado has a wonderful book on this, and he had taken Michael Chekhov's work and merged it with his sort of scientific perspective, and he's the one who had pictures of the hands with the radiant light coming off of them and people radiating towards each other. And so Mala and I began using these images. We would make these old, I was trying to find some of the old sort of handouts that Mala and I generated. But this is, I'll show you one that, these are typical of what Mala was doing and what I was doing so this was a power of positive thinking. And I'll read it. It says, positive thinking. A positive thinker does not refuse to recognize the negative. He refuses to dwell on it. Positive thinking is a form of thought which habitually looks for the best results from the worst conditions. Don't you know that the world is full of problems? Asked the negative thinker. But the world is also full of overcoming of problems, replied the positive thinker. Positive thinking is how you think about a problem. Enthusiasm is how you feel about a problem. The two together determine what you do about a problem. So this was part of Mala's teachings on a feeling of beauty.
Wow.
And if you notice, that last phrase is thinking, feeling, willing.
Yeah. Sure.
And so this, in every way in her teaching, what she was bringing in, and as you can see, she didn't limit it to just Mr. Chekhov's work. But then, like, I'll never forget, we went to the UCLA extension. I think we paid $25 for an evening workshop. And it was in a room with about 150 chairs. And they were mostly empty. There were maybe 25, 30 people there to see this Indian doctor named Deepak something, Deepak Chopra.
Okay.
So nobody knew who this guy Deepak Chopra was.
I don't know. I don't know.
Deepak Chopra, you'll look him up, Ofir. He became one of the leaders of quantum and metaphysics, quantum physics studies. He kind of launched, he was one of the first massive, big leaders in this understanding the power that we have to manage our health, to change our entire reality. And now, you know, you can't, like, you'll see his, if you look up Deepak Chopra, you'll see he's massive. And at the time, there was, you know, nobody knew who he was. But we immediately started utilizing this quantum information to begin to communicate what we felt Mr. Chekhov was sharing. And she had this, this is another one, which, boy, I can't even, but there is a way of studying this, concentrating on this, focusing on this image, that this is a 5D stereogram. 5D stereograms take advantage of the distance between your two eyes to create the illusion of multidimensional images. Over 20 years ago, computers were used to help create stereograms based on patterns of random dots. Recent improvements in computer speed have now enabled the famous artist and physicist Stephen Schultz to make the random dots out of these stereograms to produce a new art form destined to become the art of the 21st century. So hold the art close to your nose so that it appears blurry. Relax and stare at it and make believe you're looking through the art. Slowly move it away from your face until an image pops out and becomes perfectly clear. The time it takes to see the image can vary. So you're supposed to, like, do this thing to it. And as all sort of ways of helping us concentrate and try to be able to connect and relate to images. So, and it's framed with all sorts of things to remember. Your presence is a present to the world. You are truly one of a kind. Your life can be what you want. Don't ever forget, even for a day, how very special you are. Wish upon a star. Have health, hope, and happiness. Have serenity, not regrets. Have courage, be strong, make friendship and love last forever. Life's treasures are people together. So it's like everything that she was doing was looking to bring a certain kind of grace and beauty and ease to really bring the four brothers of art.
Maybe it's a strange question, but do you think that she became who she was because of her illness or something? I don't know.
You know, it's an interesting thing. The illness certainly did have an impact. There was another incident that also had a major impact, and that was she slipped. I'm not exactly sure how old she was. She slipped in the shower and she cracked her head open.
Wow.
And that and she had massive migraines. She had severe migraines through her life. And that, when we look at these things, we look at this damage, brain damage and blood damage, and it's a karma. It's a deep esoteric question, and she had very powerful karma, very, very powerful karma. I mean, to have lived the life that she led, to be a superstar, and then to be and then to be a B movie star, and then to be an abusive alcoholic relationship, to sustain this blood disease, this brain injury, and then to live this sort of glorious fly around the world kind of international publishing, where everybody, whenever you were with Mala Powers, there were people who had seen Cyrano de Bergerac and had fallen in love with her and were starstruck, jaws drop. Men would meet her all her life, and all her life she remained stunningly beautiful. I think there's let me see if there's a picture of her in this. Oh, well, here. Well, this is what she looked like when I met her. She's beautiful. Yeah. Just beautiful. And this radiance.
How old?
Well, you saw her on the video, right? Yeah.
How old is she here?
Here she's about 50.
Wow, 50?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
Yeah.
I mean, what age on what age she died?
70. 70. I'm a little blanking on that. 70.
Well, she was in her 70s?
Yeah, she was in her
Okay.
70s. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she has this two women in her. I mean, the artist and the businesswoman, because she's doing like business. I mean, she was.
Oh yes, she absolutely is. She absolutely. I mean, she's an entrepreneur, and
Wow.
yeah, and she had help. She had she when I first met her, she had a full-time secretary and a housekeeper, Iola, who'd been in the household many, many years. It was a great gal. And and her secretary. And so she was managing personnel, she was managing, and she really was active as vice president of this international publishing company and doing her own creative work. And then her husband got ill and died in 6 months, and her mother got ill at the same time.
Wow.
And her husband had not taken appropriate precautions to protect Mala from his rapid descent, and quite disastrous things unfolded in terms of again, amazing karma things, just bizarre things. I mean, Mala's being an only child, her mother would not let anyone take care of her. So Mala had to move her mother into her house, and Mala was living in a mansion that had a pool and a guest house in the back. in Toluca Lake, which is very down the street from Bob Hope, in a very wealthy neighborhood, and um, and because the publishing contracts went unmet, there were lawsuits, and then there was a mess with the taxes, with the IRS, the government, and the IRS failed to accept the fact that a debt had been paid, even though the debt had been paid. Mala had the bank statement, they had the canceled checks, everything. It took over 10 years to get the IRS to believe that the money had been paid. Then they put a lien on her home, which meant she could not sell the house. And she had no income. And then she got scammed with what savings she had in one of those Ponzi schemes. And she lost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
So she couldn't keep her beautiful home up, and she couldn't sell it. Her stepson, like after 10 years, finally paid them all the money again to the IRS. It still took them 2 years to remove the lien off the house. And she had to take in boarders. And then the IRS said, "Oh, we're sorry, we made a mistake. Here's the money back. Oops." And by the time, Mala had to immediately sell the home, and she moved into basically a trailer park. She bought 2 trailers, one to be an office and one for her and her boarder to live in. And so you can imagine it was quite a tailspin from living down the street from Bob Hope in this mansion, and her teaching skills improved quite a bit over the years, as you can imagine any teachers would, and I think that's true for all of us. But her mother, who was a Unity minister, Mala spoke to earn money. She spoke at Unity Village in Missouri, and she went on Unity cruises as a star. She went to fan festivals where she would sign autographs to earn money. And she, by 205, both of us, I'll talk a little bit more, both of us worked together quite a bit with the Anthroposophical Society in Los Angeles, and we produced a lot of plays there. And we acted in plays together, and we performed in plays together. And we also, I went to the first International Chekhov Conference in Berlin with Mala. We went to Moscow together, and in Moscow we created a performance called the Myth of Arachne, and she played Minerva, the goddess, and I played Arachne. And we created, as you know, Ofir, we like to do, created a performance with all the various peoples, even some of the children of the workers of the facility where we were in Russia. So we created a performance for the conference, and we performed. I directed her in a film that we did together, and she had started doing some voiceovers, and she started doing a few guest appearances on TV here and there, and she was really, really dedicated to writing a film and then a series about reincarnation. And but it was slow going. It was hard to get anyone to take to take the series up. And so by 2005, in order to support herself, she was booked out of town. She was commuting up to San Francisco every week to teach 2 days a week in San Francisco. And then she would go up to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and teach there. She would go to Wyoming and teach at the University of Wyoming, where her husband was an alumni, and where his archives are and where her archives are, I believe, University of Wyoming in Laramie. And so she would travel and teach. And what happened in Los Angeles was it just became very difficult for us to get students. In the last class that she tried to hold in Los Angeles, she only had 2 people enroll. And it wasn't enough to keep teaching there. So she was booked out of town. And we, of course, through all the time from 1993 until 2006 was her last year of teaching with the NMCA. We were teaching in Maine every year. She always said it was her favorite time of year. And the following year, she got leukemia and died just a few weeks before our program in Maine. She was in the midst of writing a play. She was in the hospital, still continuing to work on a play that she was working on with Glenn Williamson. And Glenn Williamson is a Chekhov-inspired actor who tours with in a lot of the Rudolf Steiner communities around the world, doing solo shows. Brilliant work. And I know he did perform that play at least once after she passed.
The play that she wrote?
The play that they were working on together, yes. I don't know too much about it. There was another element that Mala was passionate about that she did, which was called voice dialogue.
That's what I wrote here, and I wanted to ask you.
Yes. And she has a little bit about it. And it's appropriate because as we're shooting this is the fall, October of 2018, and Michaelmas was September 29th. So this is in her section of Follow the Year, where she's talking about Michaelmas. And in this, she took a poem, an anonymous poem, and she wrote a second paragraph, a second stanza to it. And this work, the voice dialogue work, was created by Dr. Cedra Winkleman-Stone and Dr. Hal Stone. And Mala trained privately and in groups with them and for, I think, about 7 years. And she introduced this.
It's like a I don't know, how do you say, a subdivision from the therapy of
Jung.
Jung, yeah.
Yes, Jung. So both Cedra and Hal were Jungian psychologists who developed this out of the Jungian base, parts therapy. And Mala was so excited about this work that she brought it into our Chekhov classes. And when we had our 10-day program for NMCA, we spent 2 nights working on these subpersonalities. because we found that sometimes an actor just wasn't going to be able to put on an imaginary body of a character or really adopt the personal atmosphere or maybe embody an emotional quality, a sensation, because of a subpersonality that wouldn't let them. And so we found that this work, and for me, Mala sharing this work, really changed my life. And it really, and because my husband also learned the work from Mala, it helped our relationship tremendously. So it helped us understand and relate. And we had a really lovely, fun relationship that spun around some of the sort of pet names we developed, the different sub-personalities we would play together. So it was really a wonderful, wonderful thing. I often say that the voice dialogue work would be the second most impactful technique that has affected my life after Michael Chekhov's. So I'm just so grateful. And we would work with each other. We would coach each other on with the voice dialogue. So here's this beautiful poem that gives you a little bit about what voice dialogue refers to. So up to the words "oh no" is the anonymous part, and then begins Mala's edition. It's called "The Crowd Within." Within my earthly temple, there's a crowd. There's one of us who's humble, and one who's proud. There's one who's brokenhearted for his sins, and one who, unrepentant, sits and grins. And there's one who loves his neighbor as himself, and one who cares not for naught but fame and self. And from this confusing crowd would I be free if I once could discover which is me. Oh no. For in my inner kingdom, I can find an opposite for every self that's kind. I have a brave one, coward, wise one, fool, a loving child, and oh, a stubborn mule. From childhood to death, they've much to say. In fact, they speak up loudly every day. There's many I would cheerfully disown, but there's no doubt they call my temple home. And facing that they're here is far more wise, for then they cannot take me by surprise. I want to hear what each self has to say, so I can choose which promptings to obey. Yes, as I calmly face each different me, then I begin to learn how to be free. So that's her gift, yeah. And that's in those subpersonalities, you allow each of the arguing opinions that arise in your head. I want to go to the party. I don't want to go to the party. I want to eat that potato chip. I don't want to eat that potato chip. Whatever it is, you allow that part to fully express itself physically. It's got its own place in the room. It's got its own name. It's got its own imaginary body. And it's so powerful. It's almost hard to believe. And, but it's really, really powerful and magical. And the idea that, that if we don't let these things out, they can take us over. And they can. And that's sort of, we see that happen all the time when people repress, and it comes out. It's going to come out one way or another. It comes out as illness, or it comes out as rage, or it comes out as mental imbalance. Hi.
Say hello.
Hi. Shall we say hi to my puppy? Want to see my puppy?
Yeah.
There's my puppy. This is Tibby.
טיבי, קוראים לה טיבי. קוראים לו טיבי. נוגה.
Hi.
נוגה.
How do you spell it, Ofir? Her name?
Noga. Noga.
Noga. Hi, Noga.
It's light. Means light.
Means light.
Or light, or the Venus? Venus or Venus.
Or Venus. Oh, yes. Very good. Beautiful. Yeah.
So, are you going to sleep? את הולכת לישון? את הולכת לישון, נוגה?
Yeah.
Wait, I'm just... היית רק אחר כך תפילו. לילה טוב. Yes.
Yeah. Yippee.
So where did you stop about the voice dialogue, and afterwards you...
Yeah, we were so Mala and I just, she was amazing in bringing to the human being as much balance and joy as possible. She would have a birthday party. Her birthday was December 21st, and she would have a birthday party, a girls' luncheon, and it would vary quite a bit. In the wealthier days, some of her, like a friend would host it at the Beverly Hills Country Club. We'd all get fancied up, and later days we'd host in the house or whatever. I hosted it several times in my home, and but she would do things like, one year was we had to come as our little girls, and we all came in pajamas as little girls, and we had to be little girls. Like, there were like 40 women at her house in pajamas acting like 4-year-olds, and she had all these games for us.
and you never left the character. I mean, you didn't
right the whole thing. One time she had us play a game called the Transformation Game, and it was a board game, but it took you, it was a very deep spiritual game, and we spent about 6 hours in all different places in her house playing this game, and it was very, very interesting. So I got some of the game, and sometimes when I create a special weekend, we have 5 or 6 hours to play the game. It's a very, it would be like a advanced DVD where we want to go really deep. Time to do that. So she was, very, very creative, and obviously with all the festivals that she did, and she always hosted a beautiful, magnificent Christmas dinner, and she would invite all the students over for dinner. So we always shared Christmas with her. And
maybe 2 last questions.
Mm-hmm.
One, how the students accepted her as a teacher? I mean, she was scary teacher, or she was very human? I don't know. What was her personality as a teacher? And the other question, if you can say in a few words what her heritage, or not heritage, like what did she what did she bring to the Chekhov world? And you know what I mean?
Yes.
Her
Yes.
contribution to the Chekhov
Yes.
world.
So ask me the first question and I'll start with that again.
What? So the first question is, how was she? How was her personality as a teacher?
Okay. So as I mentioned, when she first started teaching, she was brand new. And what, because this is going to weave together both of those questions, what she felt really confident about teaching was what Chekhov did with her. She was very gracious, very warm, very reluctant to offer really firm kind of, she was what one could, to some degree, so soft
Yeah.
that it kind of was lacking form in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
She what she brought forward was how Chekhov coached her. And so her part of the class would be coaching people one-on-one, where we would be watching. And because her main pathway in was to draw everything out of you, she wasn't going to give it to you. So she would take a long time with a person.
Okay.
So as a classroom structure form, that's hard to stay attentive to for the rest of the people. Very, very hard to keep a flow and a dynamic and excitement going. So and so how, part of the question, how did people receive her? In the beginning, it was difficult. Everyone always loved Mala, but she did not garner respect as a teacher because she took so much time with an individual, and because she really followed the flyback process of really guiding you to see, what, really leading you to your own flyback, which we know takes a long time as a teacher to really dig in and get you somewhere. She was incredibly insightful. So it was a struggle for her because she knew that it was hard for everyone to keep their attention. But what she was doing, I'll never forget for myself in that very first class with her, she gave me Medea, and she said to me, and I it was fantastic because it was so concrete what she gave to me, but she gave it to me because she had so much trust in me. She wasn't afraid to hurt my feelings there. And I think she was so concerned about making sure she didn't hurt anybody's feelings that it became kind of a hindrance for her. But she said to me, Lisa, you do everything from the little girl's perspective. You are this big, powerful woman, and your voice is still a child's voice. And your approach to Medea is still as a little girl. You are a woman. That's when she dragged me to my voice teacher, Odessa Ferris. She said, I will pay for voice lessons for you because your voice doesn't match your body. And of course, I didn't let her pay for the lessons, but the Odessa Ferris became my second greatest mentor and the person who gave me the barn where we created the Chekhov studio in LA. she was a huge mentor for the Chekhov work. So, I mean, that Mala's one act of saying to me, you're doing Medea as a child, and we need you to find a woman's voice, changed my life and changed the entire life of Chekhov in Los Angeles. And really ultimately, because Odessa provided such a home for me and also helped me really change my voice, affected my career all over the world and my ability to bring Chekhov out to the world. So we go right back to that one insightful comment from Mala about how I was doing Medea. Completely changed my life. So she had that kind of insight. And as we continued teaching together, she learned how to teach the entire technique. And we learned how to shape the work so that we could keep the dynamics moving forward. Mm-hmm. Now, the incredible gift, I mentioned George Stanoff before. What George Stanoff did was George had been teaching scene study, and none of the teachers that I worked with had done any scene study. We never did scene study in New York. We never did it with Ted, Beatrice. We never did scene study. Didn't do it with Joanna. Any of those teachers never did scene study. And while I'd been applying it in plays after play after play, to see a teacher have a scene study structure, I was able to bring that into the work that Mala and I were doing. And then when we could create scene study, we could be coaching a scene. She could be coaching a scene while another scene was in a separate area rehearsing their scene. So we could keep things. You could watch a scene being coached, or you could go off and rehearse. And that kept the dynamic more fluid and more exciting for people. And then we could create scene showcases and things like that, which we did. And what no one else had was this private coaching approach. And that's where we get to see that these are major gifts that Mala brings as her legacy that are filtered into wherever she taught. Whoever studied with her gets these, and also with NMCA, because it's really in our pedagogy, is the, hang on one second. Mr. Chekhov never read her scripts. He didn't want to read the script. He had her stand up and describe. And he studied what she was doing, because he said the character is already in you. It's already there. It's already working with you. And the way in which you describe who the character is, what the story is, starts to reveal how you're going to express it. And he would reflect back to her, did you notice that you did this gesture? Did you notice? And this becomes a major coaching technique, a major pathway into finding the psychological gesture. And this is not written about anywhere. I mean, Mr. Chekhov did not write about this. He did not write about, talk to somebody about your character and have them watch you and watch your gestures and feed them back.
I have to tell you about David Zinder is doing this kind of work brilliantly when he's doing psychological gesture. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was working with Mala, I think, and you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's a really big thing. And then back in 2007, I believe it was, at the symposium in Paris, from Moscow to Hollywood, I got to teach with a Russian teacher and Giris Patagimas. And from Kaunas, right?
Uh, Not
Or
Greece, no.
Vilnius? Is he in Vilnius? Kaunas?
I remember I just read something from him. I think it's on the Chekhov book.
Yeah. So Gittes Patagimas was teaching. So the Russian teacher was supposed to be bringing Chekhov from the Russian perspective, the Russian era. And Gittes was bringing from the Latvian and Lithuanian area in the early 1930s when Chekhov was in Vilnius and Kaunas, in Riga and Kaunas.
Yeah.
And then I was bringing Chekhov from Dartington to Hollywood. So the three of us were team teaching a workshop. And one of the things that Gittes did was he was showing how Chekhov would have the director interview the actor, and the director would intuit the psychological gesture and give it back to the actor. And so this was the first time, and the only other time that we see the seeds. We see that Chekhov was already doing this, and this is something that was retained when he became, we could say, a private director in Hollywood. And again, a very, very important insight because it honors the actor's creative individuality. And yeah, I mean, so many good reasons why this is a very, very powerful technique. And then another thing is that there were two questions that he would ask her first. And they were about thinking, feeling, willing, and about radiating and receiving. Is your character predominantly a radiator or a receiver, and how does that differ from your own? Is your character predominantly thinking, feeling, or willing, and how is that different from your own? And we can say the fact that he placed these two as primary questions to her indicates that they were a very high priority for him. But we also don't want to misunderstand that, because he created a circle chart for her, which says there's no priority, there's no set order. And because I studied with 12 different students and interviewed many others, direct students of Michael Chekhov's, what I know is that he gave each person something different. And depending on whether that person was a thinking, feeling, or will-dominated person, they got something different. They retained something different. If they got this whole chart, they gravitated to different things.
Mm-hmm.
They really gravitated to different things. And so different things became their favorites based on their personalities.
Uh-huh.
And he knew that this person needed, Beatrice, boy, she was all about the atmospheres, man. Whew. Beatrice, man, she just, the fleeting image of an atmosphere came through Beatrice's mind, and the whole place shifted. It was astonishing to sit at her feet and watch this happen. She could not explain how to create an atmosphere, but just the thought of an atmosphere shifted everything. She was so powerful. And you see that. I mean, you see that in what she does in that little 5 minutes of
Network.
Of Network. But where you really get a chance to see it is the little 1 minute scene before that, where she wakes up in bed. So her only other scene in the whole movie, she wakes up in bed and she walks through the house and she discovers Howard's gone. And she comes back to her husband. Howard's gone. And the whole shift from this gentle caress of her husband as she quietly slips out of the bed, not wanting to disturb him, and casually walks in, casually peeks in the room to see Howard, expecting him to be asleep. discovers he's not asleep. Oh, maybe he's in the bathroom. He's not there. He's not in the kitchen. He's not anywhere to be found. Back into the bedroom. Wake up, honey. Howard's gone. Right? And you feel this whole sequence of atmospheres shift with each discovery. So each for Jack Colvin, man, Jack was just all about the gestures, and they had to be really, really intense. And so it's for George Stanoff. George was pretty evenly balanced, but he was much more pragmatic, and he was very much about the composition, a lot about the composition. So that everybody had a sort of different thing, and so we can say yes, thinking, feeling, and willing, very, very important, and radiating, receiving, very, very important. But also we can say that each individual artist doesn't need to take that.
Mm-hmm.
But we can, again, be reminded that Mr. Chekhov said you can use all of these, or one of these, or none of these. And that is the grace of the chart and the whole technique. Now, of the things that Mala did, Mala was a very, very generous person, as I said, and Mala did the best she could to bring forward, as the interest in the work grew, she did the best she could to bring forward as much of the work as she could. I also explained to you the economic difficulties that Mala experienced, and the fact that Mrs. Chekhov died with virtually nothing, the fact that her estate didn't benefit from Marilyn Monroe's estate. If you could imagine, it was $1,500 a year back then in the 70s, $1,500 a year toward the Chekhov estate would have allowed Mala to publish many more things. So the ability and part of Mala's legacy, her gift to the Chekhov world, getting on the technique of acting out to the public, required her it took several years of negotiation with Deirdre Hurst Dupre, because Deirdre was going to lose money from the royalties To the Actor.
Oh.
So she had to pay Deirdre money. This is all money out of her own pocket. And I was we had a group called the Michael Chekhov Drama Group. And it was a subsidiary of Book Publishers Enterprises, International Book Publishers Enterprises. And it was, and we received the residuals, or the royalties from Chekhov's publication. So I kept the books. Part of my job as vice president was keeping track of all of our expenses. I know how little money was coming in from royalties for Chekhov's work. So we're talking $28 a year or something like that. It was really seriously nothing. And so with all of Mala's financial challenges, she had to pay for everything, for all the graphics. She had to pay for everything to get these books published. She had to pay Deirdre. She had to pay people to help put this book together. And while, a lot of us volunteered and we proofread and we, everything else, you still got to go through a bottom line to get this work out. And John Abbott. It took a lot of negotiation that I was involved with John Abbott to get him to release the audio tapes. And it took a lot of time and money and effort to write the booklet that went with the tapes, and to get those tapes published, and then again to get them transferred into CDs from the audio cassettes. And fortunately, John Phillips did the audio edit and transfer on the CDs for out of the grace of his heart. And his love of Chekhov and appreciation of Mala, but there was only so much one could do out of the grace of your heart, that it needed finances, and she struggled and she drew off of her own living to get this material out, and she was very generous with her permissions. She granted everybody or anybody who asked permission to do whatever they want, because she wanted this material to move out into the world as freely and fully as possible. And the fact that she endorsed and supported the Misha organization, she supported like her little things like in creating the first international workshops in the United States. That was my job. That was not, Mala did not want to be involved in any of the international politics. And, but I could not get through to Jane, who was at the O'Neill Center, and Mala was able to get her to pick up the phone. So she acted as an ambassador to help get our vision, where I was the power force, even the creative brain behind the effort. Mala was the face. And because she had that face and I had the know-how and the will and the effort, was willing to put that effort out, then we could work as a team and get a lot of things done. And that of course, something like Misha wouldn't exist if Mala hadn't been willing to step up for my ideas. So that's an incredible legacy, to have Misha with us. And she remained on the board and came in and spoke for them. She did not often teach regularly because of that question, question of whether or not she was a good teacher there. She had amazing gifts to offer as a teacher, and she grew and grew quite wonderfully as a teacher there, which is, of course, why she was able to actually create a living teaching, which she did do, because she became such a wonderful teacher. She did learn how to give real form and concrete feedback and sense into that. So those would be some of the great gifts. This being the greatest to the pedagogy is just sharing with us the art of this chart and how Chekhov understood it and the willingness to move it out into the world. These pedagogical gifts that we've adopted, the access to the material, and it's one of the reasons why I try to support keeping this flow of material available wherever I have the ability to do so. So yeah, amazing Mala powers.
Yes.
It's wonderful.
Well, I want to thank you. It was very interesting, and I thank you for sharing this knowledge and experiences.
Thank you, Ofir, for asking. Always an honor.
Thank you.
All right, we'll sign off. From Ofir, who's in Tel Aviv, or near Tel Aviv, right?
Yeah.
Approximate. Lisa, who's in Fort Worth, Texas.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.